My mother begged me to come home for the holidays. I'm Lauren Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and like an idiot, I really thought this Christmas might be different. She called me in Seattle at 3:12 a.m., her face filling my phone screen in the dark. Her eyes were red. Her voice cracked the moment I answered. For a split second, I thought something terrible had happened. Someone died. Someone was sick. Something had finally gone so wrong that they needed me for more than what I could give. Instead, she cried about distance. We never see you anymore. The house feels empty without you. The kids keep asking when Aunt Lauren is coming back. I sat there on the edge of my bed, wrapped in an old sweatshirt, staring at the blinking router light across the room. Outside, rain tapped against the window. I had work in 5 hours. I had a presentation the next morning. I had built a life that required routine and sleep and boundaries, but guilt has a way of slipping through logic, especially when it wears your mother's voice. She told me things were hard, that money was tight, that the holidays brought back memories they couldn't handle alone. She said she didn't need anything from me, she just wanted me there. Just my presence, just family. And despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach, I booked the flight. 10 hours of travel, 2 layovers, a cramped seat that wouldn't recline. My phone died somewhere over the Midwest. By the time I landed in Arizona, my back ached, my eyes burned, and my patience was already worn thin. Still, I showed up on my parents' doorstep with a suitcase full of gifts I'd bought for my older brother's kids. Toys, books, clothes they'd outgrow in months. I stood there for a moment before ringing the bell, heart pounding in that embarrassing way it still did when I came home. Part of me hoped stupidly that my mom would pull me into a hug like she used to when I was little, that she'd say she was proud of me, that she'd notice I looked tired. The door opened. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes went straight to my suitcase. "Oh, good," she said, already stepping aside. "You made it. No hug. No." "How was your flight?" "No." "I'm glad you're here." Just relief. Practical, immediate relief. "You'll be watching the kids," she added casually, like she was reminding me to take my shoes off. "Your brother and his wife are heading out for a few days. They deserve a break." Before I could respond, my brother Ethan appeared behind her, keys in hand, sunglasses already pushed up onto his head like he was halfway out the door. His 2 kids clung to his legs, sticky-fingered and overtired, whining over each other. "Hey, don't wipe your hands on Aunt Lauren," he joked, laughing. "She just got off a plane." They laughed. My mom, my brother, even the kids, mimicking laughter they didn't understand. I stood there with my coat still on, the strap of my bag cutting into my shoulder, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not dramatic, not explosive, just off. Like a light switch flipped in a room no one else knew existed. They didn't ask if I was tired. They didn't ask if I had plans. They didn't ask if I was okay with any of this. They had already decided. That's when I realized something that hurt more than the surprise babysitting assignment. They weren't being rude. They weren't panicking. They weren't scrambling. They were comfortable. This wasn't a favor they were asking. It was a role they expected me to fill. I forced a smile, because that's what I had always done. I rolled my suitcase inside and let the kids circle around my legs while my brother adjusted his jacket and checked his phone. "You'll be fine, right?" he said, already moving toward the door. "We'll be back in a few days. Food's in the fridge. Their schedules are on the counter. A few days." I looked around the house I grew up in. The same couch, the same family photos, the same quiet assumption that I would absorb whatever was inconvenient, so no one else had to. My mom closed the door behind them and finally turned to me, already listing instructions, bedtimes, allergies, screen limits. She didn't notice that my hands were shaking slightly. She didn't notice that I hadn't taken my coat off yet. I nodded along. because that's what I had trained myself to do over years of just this once, and we'll figure it out later. But later never came. As she talked, my mind drifted not to the kids, not to the mess, but to the phone call that had brought me here. The tears, the urgency, the way she'd made it sound like my absence was what was breaking this family apart. Standing there, listening to her outline my unpaid responsibilities, it finally clicked. She hadn't called me because she missed me. She had called because she needed me, and I had come home thinking those two things were the same. If you've ever walked into a room expecting warmth and been handed a task instead, you know the feeling, that slow, sinking realization that you're not a guest, you're labor. You're a solution. You're a line item someone forgot to budget for. I carried my suitcase down the hallway toward my old room, past the familiar dents in the wall, past the door frames marked with childhood heights. Everything looked the same. I wasn't. And for the first time since I booked that flight, a thought crossed my mind that felt both terrifying and freeing. What if this was the last time I played along? That night, after the kids finally fell asleep, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom and stared at the ceiling. The glow-in-the-dark stars were still there, faded, half peeling off. I remembered begging my mom to stick them up when I was 7 because I was afraid of the dark. She'd laughed and told me I was too old for that, but she'd done it anyway. Back then, love looked like effort. Now, love looked like expectation. I listened to the house settle around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant buzz of the television in my parents' room, my mother's footsteps pacing back and forth like she always did when she was anxious. I should have been exhausted. I had traveled all day. I had just been handed 2 kids without warning, but my body refused to rest, because once the switch flipped, it didn't flip back. Lying there, I realized this wasn't new. It just felt new because I was finally looking at it straight on. It had started years ago, quietly, the way these things always do, just this once. That was the phrase my family used the way other people used, please, just this once. Can you help with rent? Just this once. The card got declined, can you spot us until Friday? Just this once, Ethan's business is about to take off. He just needs a little breathing room. When my dad hurt his knee and needed surgery, I wired money without hesitation. When Ethan maxed out his credit cards trying to start an online store that never made it past a half-finished website, I helped consolidate his debt. When the water heater broke, when the car needed repairs, when the mortgage payment was late, I filled the gap. Every time, my mom sounded grateful, overwhelmed, apologetic. We hate asking you. We'll pay you back. This is the last time, I promise. And because I lived across the country, because I wasn't there to see the full picture, I believed her. I lived alone in Seattle. A small apartment. No luxury. No backup. I worked long hours, saved aggressively, said no to trips and dinners and upgrades. I told myself it was temporary, that I was being responsible, that helping my family was just part of being a good daughter. What I didn't realize, what I refused to see, was how one-sided it had become. Somewhere along the line, my help stopped being appreciated and started being assumed. I noticed it in the details. The way my mom would text me screenshots of expensive things with no context, like she was planting an idea. The way Ethan would complain about money problems in the same breath he mentioned a new gadget or weekend trip. The way emergencies seemed to line up perfectly with sales, holidays, and vacations. I was paying bills in a house I didn't live in, on a street I hadn't walked down in years, streaming services, cell phone plans, grocery deliveries. At some point, I realized I was funding a lifestyle I would never allow myself, and still, I kept saying yes. Because every time I hesitated, my mom would sigh heavily and say, I just don't know what we're going to do without you. Without you. Not without your help. Not without your money. Without you. It took me years to understand how manipulative that sentence was. 2 weeks before the FaceTime call that brought me home, My mom had texted me screenshots of holiday flight prices and resort packages. They were outrageous, bold numbers circled in red, followed by a sad face emoji. "I can't believe how expensive everything is this year," she wrote. "We'll probably have to cancel unless we get some help." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened my banking app. I scrolled, and for the first time, instead of sending money, I started paying attention. I pulled statements going back years. I downloaded receipts. I saved Venmo notes and PayPal messages and text threads filled with thank you and "we'll fix this soon." That's when I saw it. An email from the bank. Old. Buried. Ignored. Subject line. Mortgage statement. Available. My name was on it. Not as a reference. Not as a contact. As a co-borrower. I sat on my bed in Seattle, phone in my hand, staring at that email until my chest felt tight. Years ago, my parents had asked me to sign something. They said it was just paperwork. Just a formality to help them refinance at a better rate. They told me it wouldn't affect me, that it was basically nothing. I was younger then, less cautious, still desperate to be helpful. What they didn't explain, what I didn't bother to fully understand, was that being a co-borrower meant responsibility. Real responsibility. Legal responsibility. Every missed payment hit my credit too. Every shortfall landed on my shoulders, and I had been quietly covering them for years without ever saying it out loud. As I scrolled through the numbers, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. The only time my family treated me like part of the group, like someone whose presence mattered, was when a bill was due. When I stopped paying attention, I was invisible. When money was tight, I was essential. I almost called my mom and told her no. I almost said I couldn't come. I almost said she needed to figure it out without me. But then another thought took hold, sharper and colder than guilt. If they were willing to drag me across the country to use me as a free babysitter and a walking credit card, then maybe, just maybe, it was time they saw what happened when I stopped playing along. So I booked the flight. And quietly, without telling anyone, I did something else. I booked a call with a financial advisor. I organized every transaction I could find. I opened a blank spreadsheet and started filling it in line by line. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Because if I was going to walk back into that house, I wasn't going to do it blind. I was done being the daughter who helped and hoped it would be enough. This time, I wanted the truth on paper, in numbers, impossible to ignore. And sitting there in my childhood bedroom, listening to the house breathe around me, I knew something with absolute certainty. I hadn't flown 10 hours just to babysit. I had come home to end something. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. The house was quiet in that fragile, suspended way it always was just before chaos began. I lay there for a moment, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling above my bed, the one I used to trace with my eyes when I was a teenager trying to fall asleep. Everything about the room was familiar, too familiar. I should have felt comforted. Instead, I felt alert, focused, awake in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I got up quietly, careful not to wake the kids, and padded into the kitchen. The coffee maker sat where it always had, stained and temperamental. I brewed a cup and leaned against the counter while it dripped, listening to the house come alive in slow increments. This was usually the moment I slipped back into old habits. The moment I started cleaning without thinking. The moment I anticipated everyone's needs before they voiced them. The moment I disappeared into usefulness. But something had changed. The switch didn't flip all at once. It settled, like a door closing softly behind me. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd started back in Seattle. It was still unfinished, rows half-filled, notes scattered, but it was enough to remind me why I was here. I added more. Mortgage supplements, utility payments, streaming services under my name. I worked methodically, the way I always did at my job. Calm, precise, detached. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't drama. This was accounting. My mom came into the kitchen a little after 8, already stressed, already talking before she fully registered that I was there. Did the kids wake up yet? We're running late. To Arit, I need you to pack their lunches. I nodded, because old habits die hard. But I didn't close my laptop. I didn't stop what I was doing, she noticed. What's that? She asked, glancing at the screen. Work, I said simply. She accepted that answer, the way she always did, without curiosity, without interest. My life only mattered to her, in vague, abstract ways, as long as it didn't interfere with what she needed. By late morning, the house was in full motion, the kids arguing over cereal. My mom pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, bags by the door, keys clinking, the familiar rhythm of departure. Ethan and his wife breezed through the kitchen like they were passing through a hotel lobby. Thanks again, Ethan said, already halfway out the door. Text if there's anything urgent. Anything urgent. I watched them leave without the usual tightness in my chest, without resentment, without the ache that came from feeling taken for granted. Instead, I felt ready. Once the door shut behind them, the house went quiet again. The kids disappeared into their screens. My mom finally sat down, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath all morning. This trip is long overdue, she said, rubbing her temples. We just need a break. I looked at her across the table. 1,000 responses flashed through my mind. None of them escaped my lips. Not yet. I spent the afternoon exactly the way they expected me to. Making meals, breaking up arguments, cleaning spills, playing games on the floor. I did everything well, calmly, competently, because I wanted there to be no confusion later, no accusation that I was being emotional, no suggestion that I was overreacting, no excuse to dismiss what was coming. That night, after the kids were asleep again, I opened my laptop and finished the spreadsheet. 3 years of transactions, every date, every amount, every reason. I added totals at the bottom, bolded them. Let the number sit there, undeniable. Then I opened another tab, the travel confirmation email, the resort booking, the flights, the dates, all charged to my card. I stared at the screen for a long time before making the call. The resort employee was polite, professional, efficient. Yes, ma'am. Since the booking was made under your name, you're authorized to cancel. A few clicks, a confirmation email. Canceled. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt. I felt steady. The next call was to the airline. Flight credits rerouted. Account updated. By the time I closed my laptop, the house felt different. Smaller. Like it was holding its breath. I slept better that night than I had in months. The following morning, I asked my mom to get everyone together before they left. We should go over a few things, I said lightly. She didn't question it. She never did. We gathered in the dining room. My dad sat at the head of the table like he always did, posture rigid, authority assumed. My mom hovered near the counter. Ethan scrolled on his phone. The kids spun in circles, oblivious. I opened my laptop and turned the screen so they could all see. Before anyone goes anywhere, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. We need to talk about money, Ethan groaned. Lauren, seriously? Right now? My dad muttered something under his breath. My mom gave me that familiar look, the wounded one. Can we not do this today? We're under so much stress. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I clicked to the first row of the spreadsheet, and that was the moment I knew there was no going back. Because the truth was finally on the table, and I was no longer afraid of it. I didn't rush. I scrolled slowly, deliberately, giving them time to see what was in front of them instead of what they wanted to argue about. Numbers have a way of stripping emotion out of a room. They don't care about intentions. They don't soften themselves for family. This is March, I said, pointing to the first highlighted line. The mortgage was 2 months behind. I wired $1,200. My dad shifted in his chair. In June, I continued, Ethan's credit cards were maxed out. I sent $2,500 to consolidate the balance. Ethan stopped scrolling. When the water heater broke, $900. When the truck needed tires, $600. Electric bills, groceries, phone plans. $300 here, $400 there. I scrolled again. Every entry stacked neatly beneath the last. Every month. Something. This doesn't include the streaming services, I added, my voice steady. Disney Plus, Hulu, Spotify Family Plan, the grocery deliveries, the emergency transfers that somehow always landed near holidays. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. That's not fair, she whispered. You're making it look worse than it was. I shook my head. I'm not making it look like anything. I'm showing you exactly what happened. I scrolled to the bottom. The total sat there in bold. $57,860. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy, almost physical. My dad stared at the wall. Ethan blinked hard, jaw clenched. My mom whispered the same sentence over and over, like repetition could undo math. That can't be right. I reached into my bag and placed a thin stack of papers on the table, sliding them next to the printed itinerary for their trip. This isn't a lawsuit, I said. It's not me taking anyone to court. It's just an agreement that acknowledges this money wasn't a gift. My dad snapped upright. We're family, he barked. You don't put family in debt like that. I met his eyes without flinching. Family doesn't hide a mortgage in their daughter's name and pretend it's a formality, I said. Family doesn't spend her money on vacations and then act like she abandoned them. My mom flinched as if I'd slapped her. Ethan grabbed the papers, skimming the first page. His voice cracked. This is insane. None of us can pay this back. I know, I said calmly. I'm not expecting you to. Not all at once. But I am done living in a world where you pretend you're victims, and I'm selfish for not fixing everything. My dad scoffed. So what? You're threatening us now? No, I said. I'm setting boundaries. Then I clicked to another tab. The resort confirmation filled the screen. My mom leaned forward, relief flickering across her face. There it is, she said. See? Everything's fine. I pointed to the status line. Cancelled. The relief drained instantly. What does that mean? My dad demanded. It means, I said evenly, there is no trip. Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You had no right. They were booked on my card, I replied. From my account. With my money. My dad opened his mouth to argue, but I was already clicking to the next window. And this brings me to the house. An email from the bank filled the screen. Co-borrowers, Daniel Whitmore and Lauren Whitmore. My mom's voice dropped to a whisper. Lauren, please! We told you that was just paperwork. You told me it wouldn't affect me, I said. But every missed payment hit my credit too. Every shortfall was mine to cover. I clicked again. A small video window appeared in the corner of the screen. My financial advisor's face came into view. Hi, Lauren, she said. Is now still a good time? My dad hissed. Who is that? This, I said, is the person who helped me understand exactly what being tied to your mortgage means. The advisor spoke calmly, professionally. She explained my rights, my options, what it meant for my parents if I removed my name from the loan, refinancing, requalification, or, in some cases, selling the house. My mom shook her head violently. You can't do this, she said. We can't afford to move. That's between you and the lender, the advisor replied gently. Lauren is not obligated to remain on a loan that's harming her financial future. I ended the call. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. My dad rounded on me. You're going to make your own parents homeless over numbers on a screen? I didn't raise my voice. No, I said. I'm going to stop letting you gamble with my future while acting like I owe you my life. I pulled another letter from my bag. "This is formal notice that I'm stopping all automatic payments related to this house," I said. "The bank will contact you directly." My mom let out a choked sound. "But that's where the grocery money comes from." I took a breath. "The same place it comes from for everyone else," I said. "Your income, your choices." I opened one final tab. A list of automatic payments, mortgage supplements, utilities, internet, subscriptions, every one, with my name next to the word payer. "As of today," I said, my cursor hovering over the cancel buttons, "these stop." Ethan's voice rose, panic seeping through. "You can't just pull everything away at once." I looked at him. "You're 35, I said quietly. "You have 2 kids. You should have been preparing for this years ago." I clicked cancel. One by one, confirmation emails began pinging my phone, and in that moment, I understood something I had never fully grasped before. I wasn't destroying their life. I was stepping out of a role they'd written for me without my consent, and they didn't know who they were without it. No one stopped me when I stood up. That was the part I hadn't expected. I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately, the way someone does when they know the conversation is over, even if the room hasn't accepted it yet. My legs felt shaky, but not weak, more like they were adjusting to carrying a different kind of weight. My dad stared at the table. My mom clutched the edge of the counter like it was keeping her upright. Ethan stood frozen, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes fixed somewhere between anger and fear. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought there would be yelling, tears, accusations thrown like weapons. I thought I would feel guilty enough to fold. I thought someone would say the right thing, the one sentence that would pull me back into line. Instead, there was silence. And silence can be more revealing than any argument. I picked up my suitcase from the hallway, rolling it toward the door I'd walked through, with so much hope less than 48 hours earlier. My mom finally found her voice. "You're really doing this," she said, not as a question but as a realization. "Yes," I replied. My dad snapped his head up. "If you walk out after this," he said sharply, "don't bother coming back." I paused with my hand on the door. For a split second, the old reflex flared the urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to promise we'd talk later, when everyone calmed down. The version of me that had spent years fixing messes stirred, desperate for familiarity. Then I remembered the way they had laughed at the door, the way my mom had looked at my suitcase before my face, the way "you'll babysit" had been delivered like a schedule, not a request. I turned back to him. "If I'm only welcome here when I'm paying," I said quietly, "then I was never really welcome at all." My dad pointed to the door. "Get out." My mom reached for my arm but stopped halfway, like she wasn't sure which side of the room she belonged to anymore. I walked out into the Arizona sun, the heat hitting my face like a shock. The door closed behind me. No one followed. No one called my name. The only sound was the muffled arguing of the kids inside, completely unaware that the safety net beneath their world had just vanished. I ordered an Uber and stood at the curb, my suitcase beside me, feeling unanchored in a way that surprised me. Not homeless, just untethered, like I'd cut a rope I'd been tied to for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. The driver asked where I was headed. I gave him an address my parents didn't know. 15 minutes later, we pulled up in front of a mid-rise building downtown. Nothing fancy. Glass doors, a quiet lobby, a place that belonged to me. 6 months earlier, after one too many midnight money transfers and guilt-soaked phone calls, I had used my savings and my steady income to put a down payment on a small one-bedroom condo. I hadn't told my family, not because I was hiding wealth, but because I knew what would happen the moment they saw it. Need would find a way in. I rode the elevator up to the 8th floor, rolled my suitcase into the empty living room, and stood there for a moment, listening. No TV, no sighing, no low-level tension humming in the walls, just quiet. I sat on the floor because I didn't have a couch yet, and opened my banking app. One by one, I canceled the last remaining subscriptions tied to my name. Disney Plus, Spotify, cloud storage, random app charges I didn't recognize. Canceled, canceled, canceled. Each confirmation email felt like a small exhale. That night, doubt crept in the way it always does when you stop doing what's expected of you. What if I'd gone too far? What if they really couldn't manage? What if I had just proven them right that I was selfish, cold, ungrateful? Then my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Did you talk to the bank?" We got a letter. Another buzz. An hour later. "They want updated documents." "Lauren, what is happening?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding, then set the phone face down. For the first time, their panic wasn't my emergency. Over the next few days, the consequences rolled in faster than I expected. Bills they'd ignored came due. Late notices stacked up. The bank started asking questions that couldn't be brushed aside with partial payments and excuses. My dad didn't call me. Instead, he posted vague, dramatic messages on Facebook about ungrateful children who forget where they came from, about loyalty, about betrayal. He never used my name, but he didn't have to. People commented, "I'm so sorry. Kids these days don't understand family. You did everything for her." I saw the screenshots through friends before I saw the posts myself. For a moment, my stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. The instinct to defend myself flared hot and urgent. I opened my phone, fingers hovering over the call button. Then I pictured the spreadsheet, the numbers, the mortgage email, the receipts, and I closed the app. A week later, Ethan texted, "Can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop near my building. He looked different, smaller somehow. Dark circles under his eyes. A delivery bag slung over his shoulder. "I didn't get it before," he admitted, staring into his cup. "I just knew, if things got bad enough, someone would text you." I didn't say anything. He nodded slowly, like the truth had finally settled in. Behind the scenes, things began to change. My mom started selling things she'd once shown off online. Designer bags, home decor, items listed as barely used. My dad's new TV disappeared, replaced by an old one from the garage. One gray morning, their truck was repossessed. The safety net had vanished. And for the first time, they were forced to see what life looked like without it. The first real sign that my absence was being felt didn't come from a phone call. It came from Facebook. About 10 days after I moved into the condo, a friend from high school sent me a screenshot with a single line of text. "Have you seen this?" It was my dad's profile. His name, his photo. A long, carefully worded post about family and loyalty, and how some children forget who raised them the moment they get a fancy job and move away. He wrote about sacrifice, about being left with nothing right before the holidays. He never mentioned money. He never mentioned the mortgage. He never mentioned the years of transfers. But the implication was clear. Our daughter flew in from out of state and chose money over blood, he wrote. Pray for us. The comments poured in. So sorry, Daniel. You don't deserve this. Kids these days are so selfish. Family should always come first. One woman suggested a GoFundMe. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. For a moment, I wanted to scream. To post the spreadsheet. To upload receipts. To correct the narrative before it calcified into truth. I paced my small living room, phone in my hand, heart racing with the familiar urge to fix something that wasn't mine to fix anymore. I almost drove back to the house. Almost. The old version of me, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who paid quietly and suffered privately, was clawing at the inside of my chest. She was terrified of being misunderstood. Terrified of being disliked. Terrified of being seen as the villain in someone else's story. Then I remembered the door closing behind me. I remembered the word "canceled" glowing on my laptop screen. I remembered how calm I felt the moment I stopped explaining myself. Instead of responding to my dad's post, I opened my email and pulled up the thread with my financial advisor. I told her about the Facebook messages, about the guilt, about the sudden fear that maybe I really had gone too far. Her reply came later that afternoon. Calm, grounded, unemotional. She reminded me to document everything, to save copies, to protect myself. She also mentioned something I hadn't fully considered. When one person has been unofficially propping up a household that claims hardship, covering bills, supplementing income, absorbing debt, it can attract attention once that support disappears. Banks ask questions. Agencies reassess. Systems notice when the math stops adding up. I didn't need a warning. I needed confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. Over the next few weeks, envelopes started showing up at my parents' house. I didn't see them myself, but my mom's messages told me enough. Did you talk to the bank? They want updated information. Why are they asking about income again? Another morning, a different tone. We got something from the IRS. I'm freaking out. I never replied. Not because I didn't care, but because replying would have pulled me back into the role they were desperate to restore. Behind the scenes, the life they'd built on top of my invisible paycheck began to wobble. The bank wanted full payments instead of partial ones. Utility companies stopped accepting late arrangements. The soft edges I'd been smoothing over for years disappeared, exposing the reality underneath. Ethan texted again, asking to meet. This time, he looked exhausted. We sat across from each other in the same coffee shop. He didn't waste time. Dad needs to stop posting online, he said, rubbing his face. It's making everything worse. I nodded, but didn't respond. And I know you're mad, he continued. But the letters, the calls. You did something, right? I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. What I did, I said, was stop pretending we were being honest. He stared at the table for a long moment, then admitted he'd picked up more shifts, that he'd sold some of his old tech gear, that he'd moved his kids into a smaller room and taken on a roommate to cut rent. It sucks, he said quietly. But for the first time, I'm actually seeing what things cost. Groceries, gas, daycare, real numbers, not abstract ones someone else quietly absorbed. At the same time, my mom was selling off pieces of the life she'd curated online. Designer bags, furniture, decor, items she'd once framed as treats. After hard weeks, each listing felt like a quiet admission. The truck was repossessed on a gray Tuesday morning. A neighbor sent me a photo without comment. I didn't need one. My dad never apologized. Instead, he kept posting. Little grenades of self-pity tossed into the digital void, hoping someone would carry them back to me. He told anyone who would listen that I'd abandoned them for status and money, carefully omitting the direction the money had flowed for years. I muted him. Then, finally, I blocked him. It didn't feel like slamming a door. It felt like closing a wound that refused to heal. By the time Christmas approached again, the world looked different on both sides of the distance. I decorated my condo slowly. Second-hand furniture, a small fake tree, cheap lights that made the space feel warmer than it had any right to be. One rainy Tuesday in December, there was a knock at my door. When I checked the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was my mom. She looked smaller somehow. No full makeup, no confident posture, just a tired woman holding a reusable grocery bag like it was armor. I let her in. She turned slowly, taking in the space, the modest couch, the view, the tiny tree with mismatched ornaments. I didn't know it looked like this, she said softly. I always pictured you in something bigger. I shrugged. This is what I can afford, I said, when I'm not paying for 2 households. She winced. Then she opened the bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check. Not much. Not even close to the total. But it was something. I sold some things, she said quickly. And I've been picking up extra shifts. It's a start. I stared at the check. Not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. For the first time, The flow of money was pointed in the other direction. And for the first time in my life, that felt like progress. I spent Christmas alone that year, not in the dramatic way people imagine when they hear that sentence. No sad music, no tears on the floor, no empty plates set for people who didn't show up. Just quiet. No flights to catch, no babysitting schedules taped to the fridge, no emergency transfers buzzing my phone at midnight. I woke up late, made coffee in my small kitchen, sat on the couch I'd bought secondhand and watched the city move outside my window. Cars, people, life continuing, indifferent to whether or not I was performing my role in someone else's story. For the first time in my adult life, there was no one waiting for me to fix something, and in that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt peaceful, not relieved, not triumphant, just steady. The check my mom had brought sat untouched in a drawer. I didn't rush to cash it. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about acknowledgement, about the quiet admission that what I had carried for years was real, and that it had weight. We didn't magically become a happy family after that. My dad stayed distant. Ethan stayed busy, learning the cost of the life he was building. My mom tried awkwardly, imperfectly to learn where the line was now, and I held it. That was the hardest part, because boundaries don't feel brave when you set them. They feel lonely. They feel like sitting on a couch on Christmas Eve with a cheap mug of hot chocolate, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering if you've just made yourself the villain in someone else's version of the story. But here's what I learned. Family doesn't end when you say no. It only ends when your value was based on what you provided and nothing else. The people who truly love you will stumble, adjust, get uncomfortable, and eventually learn how to meet you where you are. The ones who were only there for what you could give will call you selfish the moment you stop bleeding for them. That hurts. It always will. But staying would have cost me more than leaving ever did. That night, as the tree lights blinked softly in my living room, I realized something that finally quieted the last of the doubt. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was choosing not to abandon myself anymore. So if you've ever been the fixer, the saver, the invisible support system holding everyone else together, ask yourself this. Honestly, would you keep paying the price just to be called loyal, or would you walk away and finally choose yourself? If you think setting boundaries makes someone selfish, type 0 inches the comments. If you think boundaries save lives, type 1. I already know my answer. And for the first time, I'm at peace with it.